Villains can be many things: hateable, sympathetic, nuanced, psychotic, but something you never want your villain to be is silly, at least in some media. I'm not exactly quaking in my boots when I'm fighting Dr. Eggman and Sonic the Hedgehog, but in more mature media, the villain should at least strive to be taken as seriously as the tone of the game will allow. After all, if I don't see them as threatening, I'm not really motivated to take them down. But being stupid isn't always a bad thing, and there are often times when a laughable villain can enhance an experience instead of taking me out of the game. But this is a fine line, so let's take a look at some villains who are more hilarious than threatening and see if their goofiness affects the game positively. I'd also like to issue spoilers for Portal 2, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid Rising Revengeance. Let's start with Wheatley from Portal 2. First off, there's no doubt that Wheatley is meant to be funny, and he's impeccably written and acted, to the point I can't tell what's scripted and what's Stephen Merchant doing improv. He's just so naturalistically written and performed. What's most impressive about Wheatley is that if he was even slightly off, he would be the annoying comic relief that I would actually want to shoot into space. But instead, he's endlessly charming and hilariously pathetic. But the challenge arises when he becomes the main antagonist of the game, and it asks us to take this silly little ball of bolts seriously. Say what you will about the comedy of GLaDOS, she was terrifying. The sheer lack of empathy crossed with the venom laced in her words made her an unnerving antagonist. See, when Wheatley gets powerful, it's impossible for him to be scary. We've already seen him as a bumbling fool. Kind of like how it's hard to take Darth Vader seriously after the Phantom Menace. But Wheatley is able to elicit a different emotion from us: pity. Behind his whimsical nature is a genuine despair at his own ineptitude. He wants to be useful, but he's literally programmed to be inefficient. So when he does take over, he starts failing, and we feel genuine pity for him because he's desperately trying to be menacing, but he just can't do it. That's not to say there isn't something scary about him. I mean, could you imagine the terror of an absolute moronic buffoon who can't maintain a single thought for 10 seconds before rambling on about something entirely separate, being given the most powerful position on the face of the earth? My condolences, America. This next one is also meant to be silly, but I think I'm about to be the first person to criticize Metal Gear Solid for being silly. See, the contrast between the labyrinthine and convoluted premise of MGS, combined with its slapstick, is what makes the franchise so iconic. Of course, I'm fine with most of it, the cyborg ninjas, the giant robots, and goofy dialogue, but I'm more conflicted when a character is presented as comedic when they're part of a deathly serious group. In this case, I'm referring to Fatman from Metal Gear Solid 2. While this idea of an obese man on roller skates drinking wine through a straw is a gloriously stupid idea, perfect for this game's tone, where I struggle is the fact that he's a core part of the villain's team. Fortune, Vamp, and Solidus are all either extremely tragic or twisted characters who take their mission extremely seriously, and the plan is just as convoluted as we'd expect from this franchise, but when I picture that planning, I have to imagine this comedy man sitting at the table with them. I mean, doesn't it undermine Solidus's whole speech about the Patriots and the fear of them starting an endless war with their unchecked power when you have a fat bomb nut on roller skates hanging around as a core member of your most elite group? What's weird is that I don't mind his insanity, as the Mad Bomber is an extremely common trope, but I think when sprinkled with all the extra Metal Gear wackiness, it becomes too much for me to get over, or maybe I'm just still salty about having to go around and defuse all his bombs. Sticking with Metal Gear, I want to talk about a villain where I'm not entirely sure where the joke ends and the character begins, but unlike Fatman, this character completely lands despite his more central role, Senator Armstrong from Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. The reason it doesn't bother me as much is because the entirety of Rising is meant to be comedic. Unlike the main series, which contrasts the stupid and severe, Rising is just a pure wacky, no consequences joyride from beginning to end. This is shown through Armstrong, as even though Metal Gear has its silly villains, the main antagonist is always played straight, even when they have a name as stupid as Skullface. To have this man, built like a brick house, utterly wipe the floor with what we perceive to be the strongest character in the world, with his only justification being how he used to play college football, is utterly hilarious. He then proceeds to espouse a retroactively prophetical diatribe about right-wing populism, and I can't take him seriously because his forehead is bigger than the robot he's piloting. He's so unashamedly an utter megalomaniac without even the pretense of rationality that you have to wonder how he even got elected, and then you remember that nothing in the world makes sense and why this game is a work of genius. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video about why the Cobra unit is Metal Gear Solid's best villain team.